So the Jimison lads, we've got the Mitchells. Why are they doing that? Why just coming over and doing that? And why have some of the other ones really stood out and still managed to maintain course, and the rest of them have fallen away? Because we are in a situation, I think, that we still don't have a distillery in Belfast, and yet we had massive distilleries.
It's amazing. Belfast. I mean, more whiskey made in Belfast than the rest of the country. Now of course, column stills are on a different scale, so the math is unfair because it's stacked. But it's still there.
Stacked, it's literally stacked against everyone else. But who cares?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Who cares? I mean, there was a question. I think someone came in here, and it is a question which is relevant at this point, which is, what percent was the grain versus the malt at that point?
Well, malt whiskey, and I mean, this is the hard part of the thesis to break to a lot of people. For the last 2 centuries, malt whiskey made up never more than 5% of Irish whiskey.
Come on, the grain.
Not even.
Come on, the grain.
Well, it's not just grain; it's pot still as
pot
well.
Still,
before the invention, I'll put it this way: you got and malt whiskey is very easy to track because there was something called the malt drawback system, where if you made pure malt and you paid your malt tax, you got money back. Whereas if you used even 2% anything else, you're not getting any money back. And it was a way to try and after the Second Act of Union, it was a way to try and amalgamate the Scottish and the Irish excise systems and to encourage distillers in Ireland to make malt whiskey, because malt whiskey meant more for the government kitty.
Yeah.
And so they tried to coerce them by saying, look, if you make all malt, you get a little money back. So those that qualify, are extremely easy to track. And when you're talking like the early 1830s, 4 out of 72 distilleries, and
4
all in Ulster. And when you talk Alfred Barnett era, you're talking 2 out of 28, Bushmills and Coleraine. There's a weird hiccup with Glen Distillery and Cork, but if you look into it, they were using mixed mash as well.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's again, and it's
okay. So
malt was really an Ulster thing.
Malt's at 5%.
Less than 5 is generous.
What's pot still then?
Before the invention of the column still, pot still's the other 95%.
So it's just pot still.
And then you have grain whiskey, like column still whiskey, really comes into its own with the building of the big Belfast distilleries in the 1880s, and they start monopolizing. So, within the space of 20 years, by the dawn of the 20th century, there is more grain whiskey being made in Ireland than there is in malt and pot put together, by far. And it just shoots, because of course the math is stacked. Once you start a column still industry, you're going up. And again, when you're talking about before, I mean, it was to the point when Alfred Barnett goes to, say, like Cameron Bridge in Scotland, big grain distillery, but also had pots and was making malt, and they say, we make 4 products in Cameron Bridge. We make malt, silent malt, grain whiskey, and pot still Irish, which means we make malt is malt through a pot still, silent malt is presumably malt distilled through a column, grain whiskey or pot still Irish is mixed mash through a pot, and grain whiskey is mixed mash through a column. And they without blushing, they say, oh yeah, we make Irish whiskey, we make an Irish pot still ourselves, because it had been seen. And when you get to the What is Whiskey trial, and it's hard news to break, but it has to be broken because there's a lot of bullshit out there, and Ireland likes to, bask in the glow of malt Scotch. And there is a history of malt in Ireland, but it is primarily a history of Ulster, and it's primarily a history of illicit West Coast distillation, and particularly the Northwest. Really, you draw a line from like Clare to Antrim. In fact, I think I draw that line in the documentary with Mark, and you're looking above that. But even that is, you're talking single malt as we don't know it now, like malted barley mixed with malted oats, both of which have been peated. What the hell do you call that? Except Inishowen, which is what they did call it, regardless of where it was made. So there's this kind of crack on. And so, when Alfred Barnett comes to Ireland, he says there are only 2 out of 28 all malt distilleries. And Coleraine is one of them. And then there's a weird hiccup where he doesn't say Bushmills is all malt. But if you do the math backwards, he goes to Bushmills from Coleraine, and then there's one more distillery out in Derry that he goes to, and it's clearly not that one. Sorry, Limavady afterwards, not Derry City, and they're using pot still as well. So Bushmills and Coleraine and then there's a weird distillery, funnily enough, called Killowen.
Yeah, I know. I know.
And I had to explain to Brendan that there was, he had never heard that there was another Killowen. And there was
Do you know what's funny? Because you told him about the Cologne, but we told him way before that, and he just didn't listen. He just went, yeah.
The Killowen was a little branch of Coleraine. And so when the What is Whiskey trial happens, there's a statement about the definition of Irish whiskey and the definition of Scotch whiskey and blah, blah, blah. And they say, except in 3 distilleries in Ireland where the Scotch practice is used, and that's Bushmills, Coleraine, and Coleraine's little side branch. And then Bushmills took over Coleraine, turned Killowen into a bottling hall, essentially, and eventually gutted Coleraine into a column still with a little pot running occasionally. So we've created these stories about this